Well, we'd like to welcome you all to another Sunday class from the BYU Library Family History Center in Provo, Utah. I intentionally made the title to this particular presentation a little bit ambiguous, and that was that it refers to special collections. And there are actually libraries that are called special collections libraries, but there's lots of other collections of genealogically valuable material that is sort of sequestered away in different parts of the country. Special collections libraries are dedicated to housing usually rare, unique, or non-circulating materials. And the key here is non-circulating. That means that they're like archives in the sense that you can look at the documents under special conditions, but you can't remove them. And there may be limitations on copying the documents or whatever else there are. And so that's where these are called special collections. But I would guess that there are very few genealogists compared to the total number. There's probably a lot, but not a very large number in an absolute sense of researchers who have spent any considerable time in special collections libraries unless they were writing a book or doing a academic type article or some other kind of research process that would make them go to a facility such as a special collections and qualify for entry and use and then spend the time within the special collections area doing all their research. On occasion, for my daughter, I have spent time in the special collections library at BYU, Brigham Young University Library, and done some copying of the documents and things that needed to be copied. Traditional genealogical sources are great. In other words, everything out there that you can get your hands on through the internet or fairly simply. But special collections can provide some things that the traditional sources are not, they're not as complete or as helpful. They can provide context, color, meaning put life into the just the figures that you see. I would say if you're looking at an entry on a census record here in the United States, you're not getting a whole lot about the people and who they were and what they did and how they lived and all of the other things that provide a context and color and also you may find some breakthrough discoveries, things that radically change what you've seen elsewhere. And one of the things that is important to understand is that because of my long, nearly lifetime relationship with libraries, including special collections, the collections of records, which I, in a sense, inherited from different parts of my family and my ancestors, usually great grandmothers, were valuable documents. And the vast number and a lot of the collection of items are in and have been accepted by libraries. In the case of my great grandmother, who gave me about 5 boxes worth of material, which I processed, that entire collection is now in the BYU Harold Bealey Library, where the Family History Center is located, and the special collections. And that's where they're maintaining the physical documents that were in all that 5 box collection. So they can include manuscripts, they can include rare books, personal papers, photographs, maps, oral histories, and ephemera. Okay, ephemera, we'll talk about that, and we'll get into what that is in just a second. It's just important to understand that these items in these special collections libraries are usually and can be one of a kind. And it may be the only copy available of a certain document or record or book or whatever it is. And they're not often, and often they're not digitized. They haven't gone through the process. Handling the documents is difficult sometimes. That is. time consuming, and it not only is time consuming, it could be harmful to the documents themselves. But getting them digitized may also cost a considerable amount of money. And so it's easier to maintain them in their collections. The special collections library could be one room in a library, in a larger library, or it could be a huge temperature controlled, access controlled vault, even a vault that was underground. So there's lots of different ways that these libraries can be physically found and maintained. And I would point out that the large family tree database websites are extremely, extremely helpful for starting points for genealogical research. But from the perspective of looking at huge numbers of people's genealogy, multiple times that I'm answering questions and looking at what they have collected, and they're asking for more additional information. But what I'm seeing all the time is that people are kind of stuck on birth, marriage, and death and census records. They're called BMD plus census. And that's just about all they ever find. And that's all you ever get on some people. As I look through the family search family tree and other family trees, unless the search engine on the website, like on Ancestry or Family Search or MyHeritage or one of the other websites, Find My Past, unless they kind of pop that out to you with their record search, there's really not much variety and not much depth in the records that are obtained. The reason for that can be quite simple. In the case of, for example, a number of years ago, my wife and I spent a year in Annapolis, Maryland, working as volunteer church service missionaries at the Maryland State Archives, digitizing records for Family Search. And the records that we digitized, there were 4 cameras operating, plus extra people who were preparing the documents for digitization. Taking the pictures is the quick part of it. Preparing the documents that haven't been opened or even unfolded since the 16, 17, 1800s is a little bit greater challenge and takes a lot of time, avoiding doing more damage or doing damage and even more damage to the documents, some of which are already fairly damaged documents. There were millions that we made a guesstimate at the end of a year of being there, the 4 of us, on kind of an average of what we did each week. We guessed we did around 2 million images. And out of that, I would suggest that we had made, I don't even know if we had shown up as a measurable percentage of the total documents that were remaining to be digitized at the archives. And if you go to some special collections libraries, you'll find some of the same issues. The issue is that the cost and time it takes to prepare the documents and the concern about damaging the documents as they're handled will often limit how many of those documents ever show up other than in a catalog. Okay, but this is, I think, the most important part, and that is that special collections libraries fill in the gaps, providing personal narratives and context. There's going to be a lot more personal kinds of things, letters, in diaries, Bibles, a lot of these things that are one-up, meaning one copy type items, make their way into special collections. That's where they end up being maintained. And a question comes up real quick here on the chat. That's, where do you find wills? Well, wills are in another category altogether, because wills are court documents that have a legal basis, and the wills are maintained in the counties where the person, it could be where the person died, where the property was located, or by agreement between some parties as to where the will ends up being probated in the court. That's just a quick answer for that. What can we find? What are the things that are there in those special collections libraries? What kinds of documents? I think right on top, and the one that I think we would find most valuable and most insightful and may answer questions that have been questions that you've never been thinking about ever being able to resolve are personal correspondence. That means letters, diaries, anything that would have been created by people and then usually end up in the trash. And if it didn't end up in the trash, it may have found its way into the special collections library. Family Bibles, there are separate Bible collections, and there are also digitized copies of Bible collections that are online and searchable. But family Bibles become an actual artifact. In other words, it's something that ties the ownership of that Bible to a particular person. And there's sometimes the thought that special collections are only interested in famous people. There's some basis for that. There's some basis for the fact that obviously there's more interest in a document that is tied back to famous people. When we were digitizing documents at the Maryland State Archives, it was always an interesting day when someone unfolded a document, and I had that opportunity to unfold a document that was signed by someone who was relatively famous. In the case of a few documents we found, they were signed personally by George Washington and other famous people from our early US history. But the same thing goes with Bibles. One thing, though, that you're going to be able to find in many cases are business records. And you may not have thought of business records as being a genealogically valuable material, but people had to go to work and people had to be paid and they had to make records and they had to be involved in the work process. And these histories and ledgers and other papers from different archives and special collections libraries can become very valuable. My grandfather, his name was Leroy Parkinson Tanner, he worked on a road crew constructing roads. The key to that was that he had a number of siblings, brothers, and the siblings created a company that did road construction. And that road construction company that began back in the 1800s and was kind of pushed into existence when the railroad came through and they all got jobs working on the railroad, that company then eventually, in the history of Arizona, became the largest employer and the largest company in the state of Arizona for a period of time. The original people finally died off, and the successors died off or got too old, and the company was kind of distributed and abandoned, and parts of the company are still in business, but it's no longer as big or as important as it was for a period of time. There is a book that appeared that tells the history of the company, usually originally called Tanner Brothers, and then it became Tanner Companies. And that so there's that book may not be on the shelf in any library. It may end up being in a special collections library. In addition, another example of what kinds of records can end up in a special collection, this referring again back to somebody in my own background, my great-grandfather, Henry Martin Tanner, was a pioneer settler in northern Arizona in a town that originally was called Allen's Camp and then St. Joseph and ends up in the 1920s being renamed to Joseph City, Arizona. It's still there, still a town, little town in northern Arizona. The records for that town were collected by one of my uncles, great uncles, and he donated those records to the University of Utah. Okay, so we have the large collection of those original records, which include letters and ledgers and company histories and all sorts of things. And they all are in the Special Collections Library at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. And then there was a copy of those documents made, and that sits in the Northern Arizona University Library, Special Collections Library. Each of the documents and each of the items that goes into these special collections are special because they have made their way and been preserved through history, through the handing off or the changing times of history, and not being thrown away as people don't appreciate their value, and sometimes, and very not very frequently, but occasionally end up in collections that end up in a special collections library. One of the other things that well, this is more something that's more likely to end up in special collections, and that is local history collections. If you want to get started looking for these types of repositories, you can do some real simple searches. So start up looking for history, historical societies, and looking for genealogical societies and looking for state history societies and things like that. And you will find a list of them for every state in the United States. And you may find one for almost every county in the United States. It seems to be a real strong tradition in the United States to have a county historical society, and there may be county genealogical societies. While we were working at the library in Annapolis, Maryland, Annapolis is in the Anne Arundel County, and Anne and I, my wife and I, joined the Anne Arundel County Genealogical Society, which was very active and had a lot of information and records that had been compiled by the members, including a 3-volume set of every last cemetery in that county. And interestingly enough, some of the cemeteries that were enumerated in Annapolis, one was in the median of a road. So you're driving down one of the main streets in Annapolis, Maryland, and there's a grass-covered median with some trees. It happens to be a cemetery. And another one is in a Home Depot parking lot. So you never know. And a lot of this information ends up being in special collections libraries. In addition, some of the special collections specialize in gathering archives of photos. They're not always part of a famous photographer's photographs, although they may be. One of the outstanding photographic collections in the United States is at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And that photographic collection contains some of this outstanding and stellar photographers of the last 100 years or so. And when I inherited a collection of around 4,500 glass negatives and regular negatives and prints from another great grandmother, that photographic collection eventually ended up being housed in the University of Arizona Special Collections photography collection. The way that these documents get to that location or where they are sometimes has kind of a tenuous connection to the original documents. And so it takes some searching, it takes some understanding, and it may take some reviews of special collections libraries catalogs to see what kinds of records might be helpful. Of course, maps and atlases find their way into special collections if they're old and if they're needing to be preserved and they're not in general circulation. A lot of libraries still have map sections where they have paper maps in big cabinets and things. Interesting side note, and just a comment from what I've experienced over the last years is that one of the areas of genealogical research that's completely can be completely done online is looking at maps and atlases, because the number of maps and atlases available now is a huge number, and those can always be located. You can find almost anything you're looking for online. It'd be very unusual that you would have to go back to the old atlas. And if you remember, if you've ever really done research in maps before they were all digitized and put on lines, and years ago, I was into the map collections, and I would have to pull out these large topographical maps, and I would then have to piece them together and figure out what I was working with. All those old topo maps have now been digitized and are available on the USGS.gov website. One pretty valuable part of what might be found in a special collections library are oral history interviews. Okay, so now we're going to think about where are we going to look to find a special collections library? Well, the first place you're going to look is universities and college libraries. The larger universities and larger colleges, and depending on the age of usually on the age of the college, if it's been around for a long period of time, it's going to have more possibility, more likelihood. They've gotten items that they no longer feel should be circulated and or available on the shelves. They don't want people walking off with valuable books and other items in the university library. So you're not going to be sitting at a desk like this with a bunch of books on the wall where you can go over and grab books off. You're going to be going into some place where there's a desk, and you're going to have to ask to get access to a specific item. And the only way you're going to know the specific item is to have gone through the catalog and determined that it's in their collection. My experience with getting into the Northern Arizona University collection from my sort of second hand off from my great uncle was interesting because when I asked for the collection, the person at the desk did a quick search on the computer and said, "We don't have that." And I said, "Well, yes, you do. And let me tell you how to find it." What you might understand too is the human interface here, that we have people who are working for the libraries and are not particularly it sometimes takes some time to get to the person who actually has knowledge of the collection enough to discuss what's contained in the collection. So it's another kind of a issue that turns up here. I guess what the summary of the idea of the Special Collections Library is that it is something that people who spend a considerable amount of their life in libraries are very much aware of and have probably used on occasion and are familiar with the processes and are familiar with how to get into the libraries and what are the requirements of the libraries. So that's sort of a subset of people because that overlaps into people who are not particularly interested in genealogy at all, but are writing books or doing research about any other topic that may be covered by the collection in that particular library. Sometimes these special collections libraries are also created for a specific company or a specific donation. For instance, a large national company would give a grant to a university to preserve their history and their records. So that does happen also. Historical societies, as I mentioned already, the historical societies are something that you really ought to become acquainted with. In one case, I visited the Hancock County Historical Society in Hancock County, Illinois. And the county society had a regular card catalog. I mean, the paper card catalog with the little drawers you pull out with the 3x5 cards. And that was the only copy of a record that consisted of the every person who had purchased or had ownership of property in Hancock County. And some of you may recognize the location of it, Carthage, Illinois. Public libraries have a local history department. We've been in libraries. We're in tracking down information. At one point, I was in northern Arizona trying to find a place called Curlin's Well, where a lot of pioneer people had carved their names into rocks. near a spring or well. And finding that turned out to be very interesting because there wasn't anybody who actually gave any directions to it, probably to keep it from becoming defaced and destroyed. But one after another of the libraries in northern Arizona, by the way, with no success at all. And it turned out that I eventually found the exact location on the internet. State and national archives. The state archives may have a huge collection, but then they have their special collection. They have their items that you would really have to show some kind of level of expertise or interest before they would even bother to go get the item and show it to you. This may be original first copies of books or records that cannot be duplicated and cannot be, even when they're digitized, the originals are still something that people want to look at. It shouldn't be surprising that there are religious archives and special collections. There's huge ones all over the country, and you can look for that if you look under libraries or you look under archives or you look under special collections. Search all three of those and historical collections and look at the religion. So, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterians, LDS Church, things like that. This is how to search for it. So the first thing you do is use online directories and search engines. So you go on the internet, you go and look on Google, and there's an archive grid, which is a website that has listed, I would guess, the vast majority of all the archives in the United States with information about their individual archives. WorldCat.org is another giant website with billions of links to catalogs and records around the world. And the Digital Public Library of America, which is its address is dp.la, is another place. This one is one that they're ingesting special collections libraries from around the country and making them available in digital format at the dp.la, or Digital Public Library of America. Just type in Archive Grid and WorldCat, and you'll get to both of those on an easy search. You can also search the websites of local historical societies and universities. Just type in, for example, in our case, BYU Special Collections, and you'll come up with a link to the Special Collections Library, or University of Utah, or Notre Dame Library, Special Collections. Every library around the country, you're going to find any large university will have a Special Collections Library. Once you have the connection and you need to know more about it, you can just simply call the librarians or the archivist for assistance. Just come in and ask questions about what they need to do to use their library. That may be online in their website. They may already have. If you are coming to the library, you need to know the following kinds of things. And this is just to show you what I mean when I say go to the universities and the directories. This is just for North Carolina. North Carolina has 36 independent accredited colleges and universities. And there are 16 separate institutions of the University of North Carolina, the UNC system, like UNC at Chapel Hill, etc. And then the UNC system also includes the NC School of Science and Mathematics and other educational research and public service organizations. So this is all kind of the number. In addition, NC Community College System has 58 institutions across the state. Now, every one of these has a location and has a library. The Digital Public Library of America has a huge collection, digitized collection, of some of the things the North Carolina system, but each of these individual colleges. So let's say you come to me and you say, I have a family in North Carolina that I need to find. Now, for some reason in my years of service, I cannot explain, but I get an inordinately large number of people asking questions about North Carolina history and genealogy. The problem is once we get through the records that are readily available and can be searched online and then or findable, then fall into this category. In other words, they may very well be in one of these almost over 50 different institutions. And so it may be fairly large. There is a consortium of some of these that work together to create a digital collection, by the way. This is kind of a registered number, and there are about 275 academic and research libraries throughout the United States. So if you call them academic or research libraries, it's almost inevitable that they will have some records that they cannot circulate. So there's going to be a non-circulating part of those libraries. They're books that you can't check out and have to use under special circumstances. And generally, what happens is they will have what they call a reading room. They'll have a place in the library where you can sit and look at these documents, but you can't take them out of the room and you have to give them back and forth to the people to get to find them for you. So you'll go to a process would be you would go to the special collections, you say, I want this book on the Wilkinson family, and you would then they go and look for it and they say, yes, it's in special collections. And so you'll have to go down to the special collections library and then you'd have to fill out a form and register and perhaps even provide documentation that you are a researcher, and then you would be able to get access to it. They would sit you down in the reading room, and then somebody would bring that out to the counter, or they would bring it out to you, and you would have that. When you were through, then you would have to return that. And they may have some security, like your driver's license or your car keys or your, whatever else. So basically, there's ways of getting to that information. And this is the terms used. They're called closed stacks. When a library has a closed stack, that means that you can only get to the material by interfacing with the staff in the library and having them retrieve the items for you and then making them available in a reading room. And then you must return them back to the people when you're through and usually have to provide like some security, such as a driver's license. And if you want to kind of get an idea of something that happens very frequent, not frequently, but can happen at the Family Search Center in Salt Lake City, the big genealogical library, they have open stacks. You can walk in and pull books off the shelf and look at them. But there's some items in there that are in restricted areas. And there are some items that were only available if you provided your driver's license or other identification and while you were and it had a restricted number of items that you could use or retrieve at a time. So this is not something that's unusual or has any kind of mystery or anything to it. It's just the common way that the libraries protect more valuable items that could be lost, and there's only one or less copies. So this basically means your access is by request and restricted. So you're going to be sitting down someplace and making copies. And so when you're doing this, it's not like you can carry it home and work on it and bring it back. You have to do all your work while you're sitting in that special collections library. So here's some suggestions that I decided were prerequisites to doing research in a special collections library or in archives. Now, a lot of things that I've said so far spill over into archives and research libraries. For example, Library of Congress is not a circulating library. Is circulating to congressmen, but it's not circulating to the public. So all of the items in the Library of Congress have to be used in place in the Library of Congress. So you need to know what kinds of restrictions there are and how to get going on this. So the first thing is to look at the Special Collections catalog. or online access instructions and contact the library in advance. It's extremely important on special collections, any kind of thing that has to do with archives or limited access, when we use the term closed stacks collections, is to understand clearly what you need to have and what conditions there are and when they are available for access. In some large libraries, Library of Congress, for example, if you want to go to a very large library, when you go in and ask for an item, you may have found in the catalog and you may have identified, and you may have access to the library and you've already got your reader card and you're already there in the library, you may find out that it might take a week or 2 weeks or even longer for that particular item to be retrieved from the stacks, which may be outside of the main library. And it's also possible in the National Archives is that there are the branch archives all over the country. And the records you're looking for may not even be in Washington, D.C., they may be in some other state. So make sure you know their hours and any appointment requirements. In other words, it may be only on Tuesdays that they have somebody who's there that can retrieve the items and let you examine them. Or it may be something even more restrictive than that. You may have to make advance application, then they reserve the items and notify you when the items are available to be looked at. Also about their policies, no pens, no food or drinks. There's strange ones. They may let you use your computer. They may not let you use your computer. They may let you take photos of the documents with a camera, or they may restrict that from happening. So it just depends on the particular policies of the various libraries. And then the big issue here is whether they have any finding aids. That means other things than the numbers of boxes and a generic title like historical records or something of that nature. So if there's some way to get into the library itself. Now, I'm speaking from experience that now may be out of date, but at the time that we were digitizing records in the Maryland State Archives, the main access to the collections was in the card catalog. And when we say card catalog, we mean 3x5 paper cards in a huge paper catalog that was not at that time digitized. Now, it may be digitized now, but at the time we were there in the library, the only real access to the records was with that big paper catalog. Now, that brings up another issue, and that is your personal experience in how to do research and how all of these things work. If you have not done research into a paper catalog like the one in the Maryland State Archives, the one in the Hancock County Historical Society, or any other paper catalogs that I've run into, still over these years, you may have to learn how to use paper catalog. And so that may be another on top of everything else. Here's an example, and I'm just going to try to throw out some examples here that would help you to understand this whole process. For instance, here we have there's a library in Pasadena, California, and if you haven't been to it, it has a fabulous botanical garden. It's in the middle of this botanical garden, and it's a real impressive place to just go and visit. And the library, you can go in there and visit in the library and see some books that are in cases and things like that that are impressive. But basically, it's a special collections library, which means that you have to comply with their requirements. And it goes on and lists on the Huntington Library website how you get into the library and do some research. And in this case, researchers have to be 18 years or older. They have to establish a research need that requires the use of the collections. They have to identify the specific materials and present all the requirements, forms of identification and orientate at the orientation. And that means you have to go to their orientation, which means they sit there and teach you how to use the library and what the requirements are and why they're going to throw you out if you do something. The same thing happens with the National Archives, the Library of Congress, and other special collections libraries. Their limitations may be to valid researchers. Now, how do you become a valid researcher? They mean people associated with universities or that have some background in research and such things. They're not just letting people in to page through their books looking for their ancestor. That isn't the way that the whole thing works. So here's some very common challenges and how to overcome them when you're working here. First of all, it's going to be the one that's the most difficult of all, and that's deciphering the old handwriting. And you need to be prepared to read the old handwriting. It doesn't do you any good if you have not looked at documents. Let's say you've discovered that you want to do research into a document in the early 1800s and you haven't ever done any looking at handwritten documents before. Well, when you get to the library and you spend all that time and you get the reading in or the archives and or special collections and you get your reader's card and you go in and you sit down and you order the material and they put it to you and it's handwriting, then what are you going to do if you don't have that background and that distinction? Now, if you could take pictures of it, that would be something else. If you can pull out your smartphone and start taking pictures of the documents themselves that you want to transcribe or learn about, then you could use the online resources like Google Gemini and Google Translate, which now, by the way, both do a fairly good job. They're a little bit different in the way they do it and how well they do it, but you can simply take an image of a document and put it into Gemini, Google Gemini, and have it translate the document. And they do pretty well. They do very, very well with any text documents, but with handwritten documents, they may be able to do some of it and not all of it. In general, finding aids are sparse. That means that there's not a lot of information about the procedures and what you have to do and how long you might have and everything. So you need to make sure you establish the hours, the availability, and anything else that might concern you. Restrooms, what do you do if you need to go get a lunch? Can you leave your materials out? Do you have to turn your materials in and reorder them? All of these kinds of things that would come up. And there may be access limitations as the days of the week that the materials are open. I'm mentioning interlibrary loan, but it's unlikely that interlibrary loan items are going to be available from special collections. That's one of the problems, but it's not impossible. It may be that the items are in the kind of condition and the type of thing that they will be able to send it to your local library or your local special collections library with restrictions that you can only access it in the presence of one of the librarians or in their own special collections library. Or you can hire someone who is a professional researcher in the area of the special collections library, and they may have experience. If you're going to do that, I would make sure that you very specify specifically before you hire anybody to do it that they really do have access and really do know how to use the library that you're intending to look into. So, what's the rule of the librarians? The archivists are special collections librarians. One thing I would like to mark, this is completely unrelated, is that this image on this page is a generated image. This is not a photograph. This is a generated image. And this is the quality and detail that generated images are getting to. So let's look here. They really are your best resource. And because that's their job, and they're usually, well, sometimes volunteers, but usually they know the collections better than anybody. They know what's there, they know how to find it, and they know what you might want to look at. So don't be afraid to ask for help. They can guide you to relevant materials and help you to navigate the finding aids. But remember, they're not genealogists and they can't do your research, but they can provide access and expertise. So if you need to have an expert genealogist, a professional genealogist, then that may be a different situation. But if you're going to do one, I'll repeat this again, just make absolutely sure that this person has actually used and knows how to use and has access to the special collections or restricted archives that you're looking for. I've been mentioning finding aids, and so let's look at finding aids here for just a minute. A finding aid is a document that describes the collection's content and history. It can also be a card catalog like the one in the back. So they're the roadmap to help you navigate the collection and find relevant materials. And the finding may list something really helpful like family correspondence 1920 to 1940. So you may need more assistance in getting into the documents rather than just looking at listings. This is one huge online website. It's called Europeana.eu, actually. And a lot of special collections are digitizing their holdings. So you may start to it. So I would do a really, really good job of searching online outside of the normal documents and things that you would think of for genealogy. You can get away from family search and ancestry into other collections and find the documents you're looking for. So the advantage, obviously, once they get digitized and are online, is you can access them from where you live. And the disadvantage is that it still costs much and it's still time consuming, so they may not be there online. Here's some practices that you might want to know about handling materials. Use gloves if provided. Now, I think your light, if you're thinking about it and you've seen some pictures, you'll see researchers there with their white gloves. Hmm. Well, what's happening in the last few years that you might not know about white gloves is that they're disappearing entirely because many, many studies have determined that your fingers are less damaging than the white gloves. The gloves themselves and the cotton and the fibers in them were more detrimental to the paper than the diamonds. But that does not go for photographs. Photographs are still going to be, if they're in an archive or special collections, they're still going to be only available if you are wearing gloves. Always use pencils, laptops, smartphones, and there may be restrictions on what you have in the reading room. Always know the policy on photos. You don't want your smartphones confiscated. Always cite the collection name, box number, folder title. So you or anyone else knows how to get back to that document where it was. Here's a case study, real quick. You're looking for information on your grandfather, a small town doctor, his diaries, professional correspondence. What you might find is very much about that person. Another one, family Bibles. You may have hit a dead end. The material is a family Bible. This could be in a local history collection, a national history collection, or any place, and you find handwritten records of births, marriages, and other information, deaths. Business records are the same way. Your ancestor may have a small bit town business. The ledgers, advertisements, and business correspondence might be in the library, and it may have information about their business, their employees, suppliers, and all of that. Oral histories may be available. There's oral histories may be recorded, and Library of Congress is one. By the way, there's a huge oral history collection on the FamilySearch.org website in the genealogy section. So you want to know about people and their longtime residents, and you have first level accounts. Photographs are the same issue. You have a box and you want to identify the people, the history photographs with identified individuals and places, and you might find pictures of your home, the businesses, and everything else. So all of these things are ways that you may want to use that. Maps are useful because they show land ownership over time. They have how the towns and communities have changed, the names and the differences, and you can usually pinpoint the location of a family's farm or example. One of those are called Sanborn fire insurance maps. They're all over the country, so there's no one URL for Sanborn fire insurance maps. They're from the Library of Congress. They're in local libraries. They're digitized and they're mostly online from very in all over the country. Manuscripts collections are huge. They're handwritten and they might be able to give you a personal link to a person and they require deciphering the old handwriting. Now we're to ephemera. Ephemera is everything else. It's from brochure tickets, advertisements, and menus, and it's part of what's in daily life. So you're basically going to look for things like church service tickets to a fair, anything that somebody throw away. This is the kind of thing where you have to be very careful because sometimes they're extremely helpful and extremely valuable, and other times you don't want to keep it. So then you can expand your search, think everything, think anything that might have happened. Employers, churches, communities, libraries, universities, every place around. And you may find that local church history leads you to records of your ancestors' family. Here's a list of the ones that you may want to look at. And these are ones that I mentioned previously. Keep looking and keep learning. And thanks for watching.